A camera exposed the predator. Number 1. Christian Bahena Rivera. Residential surveillance cameras monitoring a rural Powassie County running corridor, Iowa, captured crucial footage in July 2018 that ultimately became the central component of a massive criminal investigation. The video showed a dark sedan making repeated, slow passes along a road regularly used by a local college student. Christian Bahena Rivera was 24 years old at the time. Investigators immediately zeroed in on him as a prime person of interest. Originally hailing from Mexico, he lived in the United States without legal documentation. He settled quietly in Brooklyn, Iowa, securing employment at a regional dairy farm. Co-workers characterized him as quiet and reserved, noting his routine stayed strictly confined to work and his residence. He possessed zero documented U.S. criminal history, having lived inside the country for several years before this investigation. Outside his immediate workplace, the broader agricultural community of Powassie County essentially did not know him. Nothing in his life before August 2018 triggered any red flags. Then the tape surfaced. What did it capture? On the evening of July 18, 2018, 20-year-old University of Iowa student Molly Tibbetts left her boyfriend's Brooklyn, Iowa home for a regular jog. Nearby property security footage caught her running that exact route. She vanished. When she never returned, her panicked family reported her missing, triggering a massive search involving local law enforcement, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and the FBI. Investigators aggressively canvassed the area, systematically pulling residential surveillance video from houses bordering her path. Analysts dissecting that tape spotted a dark Chevrolet Malibu making multiple suspicious passes near Tibbetts' trajectory that evening. Detectives rapidly cross-referenced the vehicle's registration. They matched data against local agricultural employment records, identified a registered driver, and launched a coordinated search across county farm fields. Where did the trail end? On August 21, 2018, 34 days after her disappearance, searchers located Tibbetts' body inside a cornfield, partially hidden beneath dead corn stalks. Crime scene technicians gathered physical evidence and immediately food-emitted it for forensic analysis. Identifying that specific vehicle slammed the investigative timeline into overdrive. Registration records linked the Chevrolet Malibu to Bahena Rivera, prompting detectives to approach him for questioning. During that critical August 21, 2018 interview, he confessed to being present in the area while Tibbetts jogged. He then guided investigators straight into the remote cornfield where they recovered her body. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation processed critical DNA evidence gathered from the crime scene and the victim. Their forensic laboratory presented this data as the primary evidentiary link binding Bahena Rivera directly to Tibbetts' death. This case exploded nationally. Bahena Rivera's undocumented immigration status ignited a massive firestorm. Then-President Donald Trump and Iowa Governor Kim Reynolds issued polarizing statements, transforming the case into a focal point for national debates regarding immigration enforcement. Extensive media coverage flooded Dateline NBC, Oxygen, CNN, Fox News, and other national outlets. Then, trial preparation exposed a twist. Defense attorneys announced they would introduce testimony claiming shadowy individuals with alleged cartel connections coerced Bahena Rivera into committing the act. This sudden claim generated fierce public discussion and massive skepticism from legal observers. Iowa State Court formally charged Bahena Rivera with first-degree murder. His trial commenced in May 2021, roughly 3 years after Tibbetts vanished. Prosecutors built their case entirely around the surveillance footage. They weaponized the DNA, forensic results, and the exact statements Bahena Rivera provided following his detention. The defense desperately fed the cartel coercion narrative to the jury through sworn testimony, framing it as a viable alternative account of the circumstances. Prosecutors fired back. They argued the physical and digital evidence trail proved conclusive, emphasizing the cartel coercion claim lacked any corroboration. Forensic experts testified regarding DNA analysis, while investigators walked jurors step by step through the meticulous surveillance review process that nailed Bahena Rivera. Following tense deliberations, the jury returned a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. This verdict concluded a case heavily debated nationally for the entire duration of the legal proceedings. In August 2021, the judge sentenced Bahena Rivera to life in prison without parole. Iowa law mandates this strict sentence for first-degree murder convictions, as the state prohibits the death penalty. He remains locked away inside the Iowa correctional system. This sweeping case fundamentally originated from simply reviewing residential surveillance footage from one evening in July 2018, a late-night bleach run. That single time-stamped receipt unlocked a devastating forensic reality, cementing the jury verdict. Now, number 2, Henry Dinkins. A frantic July 2020 missing person report in Davenport, Iowa, triggered a desperate search. Investigators quickly retraced the 10-year-old girl's final locations and verified relationships, locking onto the man renting the apartment where she vanished. 51-year-old Henry Dinkins lived in Davenport, Scott County, Iowa, hiding as a registered offender. A previous criminal conviction bound him to the Iowa Sex Offender Registry, enforcing strict residency and mandatory reporting rules. Despite those rigid legal constraints, Dinkins maintained direct contact with the family of Bria Terrell, a 10-year-old Davenport girl. He fathered one of Bria's half-siblings. That loophole established the connection, bringing the child directly into his residence. Detectives noted his glaring public registry status the moment they opened the urgent missing person inquiry. Bria Terrell vanished in the darkness. People last saw her during the early hours of July 10th, 2020, at the Davenport apartment Henry Dinkins rented. She stayed overnight on a visit her family facilitated. When morning broke and she never returned, her panicked mother dialed law enforcement and sparked a hunt. Police instantly flagged the Dinkins apartment as her final verified location, pinpointing him as the last adult nearby. Detectives aggressively pulled commercial surveillance video from area businesses. Local Walmart cameras captured Dinkins buying bleach and cleaning supplies just hours after Bria disappeared. A printed receipt logged the exact timestamp. Meanwhile, the agonizing search for Bria dragged on. Would they find her? They would. In March 2021, searchers pulled her remains from a Clinton County waterway near DeWitt, Iowa, miles from Davenport. Investigators seized the recovered remains and pushed them through rigorous forensic laboratory analysis. Detectives meticulously constructed a mounting case against Dinkins during the months between Bria's disappearance and that grim discovery. That early Walmart video immediately anchored the evidentiary chain for prosecutors. Investigators bluntly called it what it was: a desperate effort to scrub a crime scene. Police interrogated Dinkins multiple times, recording his conflicting stories, and later broadcast those tapes during court proceedings. Authorities meticulously tracked his cell data and pulled additional security footage from cameras surrounding his apartment complex. The Scott County Sheriff's Office, Davenport Police Department, and Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation relentlessly shared intelligence. Prosecutors charged Dinkins with first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping right there in Scott County, Iowa. He gambled on a bench trial, demanding a lone judge decide his fate instead of a jury. Court TV broadcast the entire legal showdown, projecting the harrowing details to a national audience. The state hammered him with the Walmart video, interrogation recordings, cell data, and forensic evidence from Bria's remains. Defense attorneys attacked the evidence chain and fought the timeline. But 2023 brought dual guilty verdicts on both charges. The courtroom gallery erupted audibly, and family members delivered gut-wrenching victim impact statements during sentencing. A judge sentenced Henry Dinkins to 2 consecutive life terms inside an Iowa state prison. Those dual convictions guaranteed he would remain caged for his natural life, completely abolishing parole. Airtight surveillance records transformed a simple missing person report into a decisive judicial verdict, stacking forensic findings and 2 years of investigation. But what happens when the caller is the monster? Number 3, Alexander Jackson. He claimed someone broke in. In June 2021, emergency dispatch in Albany Township, Iowa, received a frantic 911 call reporting an intruder. But the responding officer's body camera proved the threat was already living inside, shattering the caller's story. Prosecutors later forced a stunned jury to watch nearly an hour of that raw police footage. Alexander Jackson was a young adult male living inside his family's Albany Township, Iowa, home when terror unfolded. He shared the property with his parents and his 19-year-old sister. Before this bloodbath, Jackson possessed 0 public criminal record, and law enforcement had no reason to watch the family. To the public, they modeled a perfectly conventional household, or so everyone thought. Jackson grew up locally and kept his head down, blending in without leaving any troubling paper trail. First responders saw no disqualifying red flags in his background upon arriving at the scene. But the true horror did not stem from who he pretended to be before that night. It emerged from evidence detectives collected within hours, instantly shredding the lies he fed to the arriving cops. Because on that dark date in 2021, emergency services answered a 911 call from Alexander Jackson himself. A frantic dispatch warned police about an armed intruder attacking a family home. Officers breached the doors expecting a gunfight, only to find 3 members of the Jackson family. Someone had gunned down his mother, his father, and his 19-year-old sister. All 3 victims died at the scene or shortly afterward. Jackson stood there, speaking calmly with officers as the household's sole remaining survivor. First responders locked down the area, treating the aftermath as an active home invasion. Investigators urgently scoured the property and the surrounding streets for physical evidence of an intruder. Police targeted neighboring properties possessing critical surveillance footage. Detectives needed this video. Did an unknown third party actually breach the Jackson residence during that exact time frame? Detectives secured and scrutinized those camera records during the critical early investigative hours. The entire Jackson case fractured when detectives reviewed the surveillance evidence pulled from a neighbor's exterior camera system. Experts analyzed that footage, showing the approaches to the Jackson property. The video documented 0 individuals entering or fleeing the residence during the crucial time frame. This definitively dismantled the outside intruder story. First responders also recorded nearly an hour of body cam footage capturing the bloody scene conditions. The video logged the victims' exact positions alongside Jackson's real-time behavior. Prosecutors admitted this directly into the evidentiary record, playing it during trial proceedings. Investigators collaborated with the state's Division of Criminal Investigation, conducting rigorous forensic examinations of the physical scene and the victim's gunshot injuries. Police arrested Jackson. The Law and Crime Network covered his trial live, broadcasting the intense courtroom proceedings to a national audience. Prosecutors built the core of their evidentiary presentation, using a combination of neighbor surveillance records, body cam documentation, and forensic scene analysis. Iowa State Court officially charged Jackson with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Prosecutors weaponized the neighbor's surveillance footage alongside body cam video as direct evidence shattering his intruder narrative. They combined audio recordings, forensic shooting, sequence analysis, and definitive investigative scene findings. The defense aggressively attacked the prosecution's official timeline, raising serious questions regarding how investigators interpreted this evidence. Jurors absorbed critical testimony from law enforcement investigators, forensic experts, and specialists involved in the case reconstruction. The prosecution argued that the complete absence of a documented intruder, paired with hard physical evidence, proved Jackson was the sole individual responsible for these 3 executions. After intense deliberations in 2023, the jury returned 3 guilty verdicts for first-degree murder. Alexander Jackson faced sentencing on all 3 first-degree murder convictions. Iowa law mandates life without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder. The judge officially imposed that exact sentence for every single count. The case commanded sustained public attention due to the bizarre 911 call, the body cam footage, and the neighbor's surveillance record collectively forming the absolute foundation of the prosecution's case. Detectives started chasing a reported home intruder, but the investigation ended with a jury verdict establishing that this killer never actually existed. Number 4. Corina Cooper. Detectives pointed digital communication records during a Ringgold County homicide investigation. This 2021 Iowa case exposed a digital contact pattern that investigators simply could not reconcile with the story told by the only person present when officers arrived. Corina Cooper was an Iowa woman married to Ryan Cooper, a working farmer in southern Iowa's Ringgold County. They shared a quiet rural property. Out in the local agricultural community, Ryan Cooper held a strong reputation as a dedicated working farmer with an established presence nearby. Corina actively managed the household's domestic sphere. On the surface, the couple presented themselves as a perfectly conventional, rural Iowa family unit. But investigators later documented a parallel reality. They uncovered a hidden dimension to Corina's personal life, conducted almost entirely out of sight. She maintained an ongoing extramarital relationship alongside her marriage. This affair soon became central to the prosecution's entire theory of the case. Before this investigation started, Karina had zero documented criminal history, and nothing in her public profile hinted at the circumstances law enforcement would uncover after her husband's sudden death in early 2021. Brian Cooper lay dead inside his Ringgold County home in 2021. He suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the face. When law enforcement arrived at the property, Karina Cooper remained at the scene, positioned directly on top of her husband's body in his recliner. Detectives immediately scrutinized her initial story to first responders, weighing it against the stark physical evidence. The Ringgold County Sheriff's Office processed the scene before handing the complex case up to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. Agents initiated a digital deep dive, pulling critical records from Snapchat and cell tower location data. Obtained legally, these records documented a heavy pattern of secret communication and physical proximity between Karina Cooper and another individual, Houston Danker, active during the exact period surrounding Ryan Cooper's death. First responders didn't just find Ryan Cooper's body. They found something strictly withheld from the public draped directly over his bleeding corpse, his own wife. But investigators ultimately proved that digital forensics actually held the determinative answers. Detectives immediately analyzed her Snapchat history alongside the local cell tower data. They brought it into court, letting experts map out messages proving Karina Cooper and Houston Danker orchestrated a coordinated plan. Tower pings placed their specific devices together, exactly matching a prearranged, documented setup. Authorities officially named Danker a co-conspirator and charged him separately. Why do it? Digital records uncovered a secret extramarital affair, which sparked national media attention immediately. Dateline NBC produced a full documentary episode titled The Farmer's Wife, while Court TV broadcast the entire trial as Widow's Words. The media focused relentlessly on the visual circumstances of the initial discovery, Karina laying on top of her husband's body. But that digital breadcrumb trail formed the prosecution's true core narrative. Physical forensics from the scene locked perfectly with the communications analysis, building a solid framework for jurors. Iowa State Court officially charged Karina Cooper with first-degree murder. Court TV streamed her trial entirely. Prosecutors hammered home a case built heavily on digital communication records, cell tower analysis, physical forensics, and the fact that she was clinging to his dead body when law enforcement arrived. The defense fought back. They attacked the prosecution's message interpretation and offered alternative explanations for the digital evidence. But prosecutors held the line. They insisted that the combination of physical evidence, the digital trail, and the documented affair with Danker proved premeditation. Jurors sat through days of testimony from forensic experts and digital evidence analysts. Seasoned law enforcement investigators also took the stand. Finally, in 2025, the jury delivered a first-degree murder conviction. Under Iowa's mandatory sentencing framework for first-degree murder, the judge handed Karina Cooper life in prison without the possibility of parole. Houston Danker navigated parallel legal proceedings, facing separate charges as a co-defendant in this exact matter. It all started when detectives identified inconsistencies between the physical crime scene circumstances and Karina Cooper's official story. It ended with a verdict anchored by digital forensic analysis. But another extracted phone was about to unlock a completely different investigation. Number 5. Dakota Van Patten. We cleaned up Case 5 to remain appropriate for all audiences. In 2024, hikers found a body near an Iowa lake. That discovery triggered a forensic sweep, targeting digital material pulled from a suspect's phone. Detectives would later call this extracted data pivotal in the case against Dakota Van Patten. Dakota Van Patten was a young Iowa man in 2024. He knew the victim, 20-year-old Melody Hoffman, through prior social contact. The investigation also dragged in a second individual charged in connection with her death. What made police look at him? Digital evidence directly tied to the crime forced their hand. Sustained national media coverage dominated the airways. The evidentiary record was simply too strong and unique to ignore, combining DNA, forensic results, and digital material. 20-year-old Melody Hoffman vanished in 2024, right after getting a Snapchat message. Digital analysts dug into the logs. They proved she got lured to a location using that platform. Searchers later recovered her body near an Iowa lake, A multifaceted investigation kicked off, drawing heavily on forensic examinations and digital records. They gathered physical evidence from the scene. Court TV broadcast Dakota Van Patten's trial, bringing it to a national audience. Local law enforcement teamed up with state forensic resources. Together, they built an evidentiary case across several parallel tracks. Lab techs analyzed biological material recovered at the scene. They extracted a forensic profile and linked it directly to Van Patten. Expert testimony presented this finding to jurors, officially placing him at the scene. A digital forensic sweep of a connected phone yielded photographic evidence. Those images became a significant part of the prosecution's presentation. Prosecutors reviewed the Snapchat communication logs, documenting initial contact with the victim. They introduced these records to reconstruct the timeline of events. The state charged Van Patten with first-degree murder and related offenses. Prosecutors utilized the DNA forensics and phone extractions. They used Snapchat records to establish the exact communication chain preceding Hoffman's disappearance. The defense struck back, engaging directly with how police handled and interpreted the digital and forensic evidence. The jury listened closely as DNA analysts, digital forensics, examiners, and law enforcement investigators took the stand. They returned a guilty verdict on the murder charge. In November 2025, the judge handed Dakota Van Patten a life sentence. Investigators found Melody Hoffman dead near a lake. Forensic DNA, digital trails, and strict documentation built her case. But another discovery waited nearby. The co-defendant faced separate trials. Number 6 focuses on Seth Telley. A husband gave a statement to Wapello County law enforcement. Back in May 2012, Iowa investigators analyzed his words. His story crashed hard against the physical evidence they documented at the crime scene. That contradiction triggered over 2 years of legal proceedings before a jury reached a verdict. We must look at the timeline. Seth Telley lived in rural Wapello County, Iowa, during the investigation, somewhere between his late 20s and early 30s. He recently married Lisa Tech. She carried their unborn child when someone ended her life. They built a life together right there in the area, and Seth held local employment. Locals viewed him as entirely ordinary. He was just a recently married man starting a family. That specific ordinary status directed the initial investigation the moment detectives found his wife dead. Lisa Tuchel dying while pregnant immediately amplified public sympathy and drew intense media attention as facts developed. Seth possessed zero documented criminal history before this investigation. His clean background offered absolutely no red flags to anyone in the surrounding community. Why did investigators and prosecutors focus on him? The intense scrutiny originated entirely from their examination of the scene and a deep analysis of his personal account. They scrutinized the initial call. In May 2012, Seth Tech called law enforcement. Someone shot his wife, Lisa Telley, inside their home. He immediately pointed fingers at a neighbor who possessed a documented history of mental illness. While he named this specific individual as the killer, law enforcement processed the scene and forensically examined the physical evidence. Then the case fractured. In September 2012, the neighbor Seth named suffered a fatal heart attack. He died months before 3 trials even began. This event generated massive public attention because of the enormous potential implications. We must return to the bedroom. A shooter killed a pregnant Lisa Tickle right in her bed. Experts evaluated the physical scene evidence, specifically focusing on trajectory analysis and forensic documentation conditions. They food-emitted everything for examination. Investigators analyzed whether the available evidence matched an outside intruder or pointed to another scenario. The assessment yielded findings that completely contradicted the account Seth Telley provided. Prosecutors immediately moved forward on those facts. The investigation into the Tech case featured intense legal complexity that matched the depth of its actual forensic content. The system required 3 separate trials. 2 initial hung juries stalled the process before a third proceeding secured a conviction in 2014. They secured it despite a massive hurdle. The suspect, Seth, named initially, died before proceedings even started. This fact added a layer of public scrutiny rarely seen in Iowa cases. The defense lost the ability to directly challenge or cross-examine the exact man Seth accused. Therefore, the forensic evidence centered strictly on scene analysis and trajectory findings. Prosecutors presented the physical evidence documentation from the bedroom where they found Lisa across all three proceedings. Every single trial sparked renewed media attention. Dateline NB, CA, and E's American Justice, and the Associated Press covered it. Investigators coordinated directly with prosecutors across the extended timeline. Their evidence record remained totally consistent across all three presentations to juries. Why persist after multiple hung juries? The prosecution relied heavily on the investigators' absolute confidence in the case's evidentiary foundation. Authorities charged Seth Telley with first-degree murder in Wellow County, Iowa. The state tried the charge 3 times. The first 2 proceedings concluded with hung juries, completely unable to reach a verdict. The third trial in 2014 presented the exact same core prosecution case. They used forensic scene analysis and physical evidence that eliminated an intruder scenario. They used the initial account Seth gave to law enforcement. Defense arguments across all 3 trials directly challenged the forensic interpretations. They maintained the state lacked sufficient evidence to establish guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The third jury took the case. After hearing the full evidentiary record, they returned a guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder. That decision concluded a prosecution requiring 3 separate attempts and spanning more than 2 years. A judge sentenced Seth Telley to life in prison without the possibility of parole following his 2014 conviction. Iowa mandates this term for first-degree murder. This case stands out in Iowa legal history because it required 3 trials before securing a conviction. Everything originated in May 2012. A husband provided an account that drastically failed to align with the physical evidence documented at the scene. The eventual verdict finally closed proceedings that involved 2 separate hung juries. It survived the death of an initially identified suspect before trial ever began, alongside sustained coverage from national documentary programs. Number 7 brings us to Tracy Richter Roberts. Evidence processors in Carroll County, Iowa, discovered a pink spiral notebook inside a vehicle. They cataloged it and set it aside in 2001. A forgotten object held a killer's exact blueprint. It sat completely ignored. It would not become the focal point of a renewed criminal investigation for nearly a decade. But when detectives finally opened it, the case shattered. Tracy Richter Roberts lived in Carroll County, Iowa, in December 2001. She was a mother, and the blood spilled directly inside her family residence. According to her exact story to local law enforcement, a terrifying home invasion forced her to act in pure self-defense the second an intruder breached her doors. Dustin Weddy played that intruder, a guy in his early 20s who already shared a prior connection to the household. After firing, Tracy Richter Roberts cooperated fully, rigidly maintaining her self-defense narrative while the initial investigation unfolded. Authorities bought it. They reviewed the immediate aftermath as a legitimate self-defense scenario, filing 0 charges at that time. She spent the next several years building a public profile as the brave survivor of a terrifying intrusion. That framing persisted until investigators revisited the cold case years later. Would the lie hold? No. On December 13, 2001, gunfire killed Dustin Weddy inside the Carroll County residence occupied by Tracy Richter Roberts and her family. Weddy, in his early 20s, possessed an established prior connection to the home. Richter Roberts met arriving law enforcement with a wild claim, describing a violent attack by Weddy that forced her to fire. Investigators processed the physical scene, officially documenting the fatal encounter as a potential self-defense shooting. Police collected physical evidence and searched Wade's vehicle parked outside. Inside his car, investigators located a pink spiral notebook. They logged the contents of that notebook directly into the evidence record at the time. Prosecutors dropped the case, leaving Richter Roberts uncharged. The notebook sat in evidence storage, unexamined in depth for years. A perfect crime? Not exactly. It took investigators taking a fresh look and food ejecting that notebook to detailed analysis before its contents entirely shifted the inquiry's direction. Authorities initiated the reopening of the Dustin Weddy case years after they originally closed the investigation without charges. When investigators finally re-examined that pink spiral notebook recovered from Wade's vehicle, they struck gold. The written material inside addressed circumstances surrounding the shooting, laying the foundation for an entirely new theory of the case. Investigators analyzed the notebook's contents alongside a massive re-examination of physical evidence from the scene. Forensic experts determined the notebook material severely contradicted the self-defense account, demonstrating clear pre-knowledge and extensive pre-planning. Police arrested Arta Roberts in 2010. They charged her with first-degree murder approximately 9 years after the shooting. NBC and Oxygen both heavily covered the case, drawing renewed media attention due to the massive gap between the incident and the formal charge. The AP documented court proceedings, capturing extensive courtroom footage as the drama unfolded. Post-arrest press conferences clearly outlined the investigative basis authorities used for reopening the case. Prosecutors officially charged Tracy Richter Roberts with first-degree murder in Carroll County, Iowa. The charge stemmed from the 2001 death of Dustin Weddy. During the 2011 trial held a decade after the shooting, prosecutors centered their case on that spiral notebook. They highlighted the re-examined physical evidence alongside inconsistencies investigators identified within the original self-defense account. The defense fired back. They maintained the shooting represented a lawful act of self-defense, challenging the evidentiary weight attached to the notebook's contents. Prosecutors countered by presenting an analysis of the notebook material alongside forensic findings from the original scene. Jurors heard testimony from investigators who worked both the original 2001 case and the reopened inquiry, plus forensic analysts and evidence specialists. The jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of first-degree murder. Arta Roberts received life in prison without the possibility of parole following her 2011 conviction. Authorities secured that conviction a full decade after the death of Dustin Weddy. The saga remains notable across the Iowa legal record as a prime example of cold case reinvestigation driven by re-examining physical evidence collected at the original scene. That pink spiral notebook, first cataloged and set aside in 2001, ultimately served as the documentary turning point in a case unresolved for nearly 10 years. But what if the dead still text? They hijack your life. Number 8. Shauna Liz Goler. A missing persons case filed in Douglas County, Nebraska, in November 2012 took on an unusual dimension. Digital communications, purportedly from the missing woman, Carrie Farver, kept flooding friends and associates. These messages continued for months, and then years, after her disappearance was first reported. Shauna Goler, also known as Liz Goler, was an Iowa woman who developed a personal and romantic connection to the exact same individual, a man named Dave Krupa. Carrie Farver had been seeing him at the time of her disappearance. Goler operated as a mother raising children at a residence in the Council Bluffs, Iowa area. Detectives documented 50,000 texts, a burned house, and a shooting. One small problem. The woman supposedly sending them was dead. Initially, Shauna Goler looked like an everyday citizen handling a messy personal life. She fully cooperated with police, answering questions without raising any red flags. But as detectives dug deeper into records, a clear digital pattern surfaced. The data made it impossible to point the finger at anyone except Shauna Goler. Throughout the multi-year police inquiry, her actions escalated. She intentionally shot herself and burned down her own home. She manufactured this chaos strictly to misdirect the entire police investigation. That crime centered directly on Carrie Farver. This local Iowa woman vanished in November 2012 after visiting Dave Krupa around the Omaha Council Bluffs area. Immediately after she disappeared, her friends and family started receiving unexpected texts, emails, and Facebook messages claiming to be Carrie. The sheer volume was mathematically staggering. Police eventually cataloged over 50,000 of these targeted messages sent across 4 relentless, distinct years. The messages directly threatened Dave Krupa and Shauna Goler. Simultaneously, Goler played the victim. She told police she faced a constant barrage of targeted daily attacks. She claimed a mystery attacker shot her. Then, a fire burned her house down to the ground, tragically killing her pets inside the flames. Detectives naturally assumed the missing Carrie Farver was the actual stalker pulling the strings. They believed that lie. Then, advanced digital forensics ripped the case wide open, pointing the evidence in a completely different direction. The ultimate breakthrough required rigorous, undeniable tech analysis. Cyber experts scrutinized the metadata buried inside Carrie Farver's threatening texts. They tracked the network origins, proving the missing woman simply could not be the actual sender. What about that shooting and the reported house fire? Investigators strictly re-examined Golar's statements. They realized she faked the harassment entirely. Then came the smoking gun. Detectives extracted a deleted photograph straight from Golar's cell phone. It showed a tattooed foot. A forensic check against medical records confirmed the ink. The foot belonged to Kari. Finding that specific picture hidden inside Golar's personal storage finally provided undeniable, direct proof. She clearly had physical contact with Kari Farver's remains. Police immediately slapped handcuffs on Golar. The case quickly exploded nationally. Netflix released a documentary called Lover, Stalker, Killer, and it instantly shot to #1 globally. Dateline NBC spotlighted the chaos in a 2018 episode titled Scorned, Oxygen, and Investigation Discovery also aired separate deep dives. Prosecutors officially charged Golar with first-degree murder for Kari's death. Iowa hosted the murder trial. Prosecutors laid out the massive digital roadmap connecting over 50,000 messages, the damning metadata tracking their exact origins, and that specific tattooed foot picture found on Golar's phone. They proved she staged the fire and her bleeding leg as calculated acts of pure deception. Her defense desperately tried shredding the tech data and the forensic timeline, but the state held firm. The massive digital footprint, the undeniable photos, and 4 straight years of calculated behavior sealed her fate. The jury listened to tech experts, lead detectives, and key witnesses who watched Kari vanish, while Golar actively manipulated the investigation in the long years that followed. The jury found her guilty. Cameras captured a stone-faced Golar shuffling out of the courtroom in cuffs. The judge handed Shauna Golar a life sentence for the first-degree murder charge. Kari Farver's complete remains stay lost. What started as a missing person report in 2012 ended with an ironclad conviction in 2017, exactly 5 years later. Unshakable tech evidence and one single deleted photo from the defendant's phone finally secured justice. It remains Iowa's most extensively documented digital impersonation case. But what happens when another partner vanishes? Number 9. Tate Perk. In 2015, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation finally cracked open a frozen cold file from Palm Sunday, 2000. A 23-year-old woman vanished. Her fiancé casually told the cops she walked out to buy a pack of cigarettes and never came back home. That fiancé was Tate Perk, an Iowa resident engaged to Kora Okansky right when she fell off the map in April of 2000. Kora was only 23. She was a mother. They shared a young child together, and right before she vanished, this specific relationship was the central foundation of her daily life. Perk gave the police a ridiculously simple, straightforward cover story. He swore Kora walked out the door entirely on her own, claiming zero knowledge of her whereabouts after that moment. For years, her file gathered dust inside local police boxes. The trail went ice cold. But what was Perk actually hiding? A killer watches his fiancée walk away, knowing she won't return. Tate Perk lived quietly in Iowa, his profile showing zero signs of police scrutiny. The trail went totally cold in the early 2000s, resting undisturbed for 15 years before the Iowa DCI intervened. Investigators initiated a formal review, leading to an arrest tied to Palm Sunday, April 16, 2000. Tate Perk reported his fiancée Kora Okansky missing, claiming she left for cigarettes and never returned. These circumstances triggered an investigation, but detectives hit a wall regarding physical evidence. A total lack of witnesses, combined with Perk's simple explanation, made the timeline impossible to crack. Searchers never found Kora's body. Without remains or a physical trace, prosecutors lacked the forensic foundation required for trial. Authorities eventually closed it as an unresolved missing person matter. Her family refused to surrender, maintaining contact with law enforcement. Because of them, the case periodically drew renewed attention. Would anyone expose the truth? Someone finally tried. In 2015, 15 years after Kora vanished, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation reopened the file, committing resources to examine the record, conduct a RAIN process, and review original evidence documents. Between 2015 and 2016, the Iowa DCI executed a comprehensive reconstruction of Kora Okansky's disappearance. Detectives ripped apart the original case file. They conducted new interviews, weighing Perk's exact 2000 account against fresh information surfacing over the years. Without Kora's remains, Detectives built their case on circumstantial and testimonial evidence instead of hard forensic material. This included testimony from individuals claiming Perk confessed to killing Okansky and burying her body. The hammer dropped in December 2016. 16 years after Kora walked out forever, police arrested Tate Perk. The Iowa DCI announced the arrest during a press conference covered by regional outlets and AP wire photography. This marked the first charge in a case rotting in the cold case archive. Could they win without a body? Prosecutors walked into Iowa State Court in May 2017 to build a first-degree murder trial around a missing victim. A jury heard the story and returned a guilty verdict on that first-degree murder charge. But the presiding judge ripped that victory away, overturning the verdict immediately. He ruled the confession witnesses lacked corroboration and granted Perk a new trial, moving to a judge later in 2017. In December 2017, the judge delivered a guilty verdict. He determined the evidence proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Perk grabbed, choked, and slammed Kora Okansky to the floor on April 16, 2000, causing her death. The judge concluded this evidence legally supported a second-degree murder finding. He ruled prosecutors failed to prove the premeditation required for a first-degree conviction. The court sentenced Tate Perk to 50 years in prison in February 2018 following that second-degree murder conviction. Investigators never located Kora Okansky's remains. This mystery stands as one of the few successful Iowa murder prosecutions built on whispers. Prosecutors relied exclusively on circumstantial and testimonial evidence, lacking physical remains, or a forensic chain of custody linking the defendant to the death. A nightmare starting with a Palm Sunday report in 2000 ended via a judicial verdict 18 years later. But what happens when an eyewitness waits even longer? Number 10. Annette Cahill. 27 years after someone beat Corey Wieneke to death inside his Muscatine County, Iowa home, a woman contacted law enforcement carrying a childhood memory. Prosecutors utilized that memory to construct an entire murder case built on witness testimony and behavioral evidence, lacking any physical forensic connection to the defendant. Annette Cahill, known as Dee, knew Corey Wieneke through the Muscatine County social network in the early 1990s. She moved in the exact same community circles as the victim, who worked as a local bartender. Following Wieneke's death in 1992, police never publicly identified her as a person of interest, and the investigation went cold without an arrest. Decades quietly slipped by. Cahill continued living her life without a criminal record or law enforcement contact relating to the Wieneke homicide. She lived openly, not acting as a fugitive, free from surveillance, and unlinked to the unsolved death. Her post-1992 community position looked normal, merely a woman who occupied the victim's social environment, but attracted zero documented suspicion until a ghost from her past came forward decades later. Someone beat Corey Wieneke, a young Muscatine County man, to death on October 13, 1992. The investigation failed to produce enough evidence to identify and charge a perpetrator, leaving the file classified as an unsolved homicide. The file maintained that status for over 2 decades until December 2017, when a woman approached police carrying a vivid recollection from her childhood. A 9-year-old girl watched a grown woman weeping over a dark flame. She kept this secret locked away for over 2 decades. What exactly did she see Annette Cahill doing? She watched Cahill sobbing uncontrollably while lighting black candles right after Vine's death. But someone else was watching. This man swore he caught Cahill destroying blood-soaked clothes after Wieneka's death. Could this hold up in court? Those 2 chilling memories stacked together gave prosecutors their entire playbook. Detectives and the Muscatine County Attorney's Office pushed forward anyway, building a murder case on those aging memories alone. They had exactly 0 physical forensic proof. No DNA, no stray fibers. Investigators found absolutely no trace material tying Cahill to Vine's death. So prosecutors simply gambled on the witnesses' stories and the suspect's bizarre behavior. Trying a murder suspect without a single piece of physical evidence sparked massive legal controversy everywhere. Dateline, NBC, even swooped in, broadcasting the drama nationwide in an episode they called The Black Candle Confession, featuring Keith Morrison. The entire country locked eyes on this courtroom spectacle. People could not believe prosecutors sought a conviction using only 30-year-old memories, fueling intense courtroom theatrics that left viewers completely hooked. Press pool photographers snapped away furiously, catching every single raw emotional reaction to the verdict on camera. Muscatine County, Iowa, officially slapped Cahill with first-degree murder. Her March 2019 trial flatlined into a mistrial after a deadlocked jury refused to agree. Prosecutors dragged everyone back for a retrial in September 2019, demanding jurors trust two people remembering 1992. Jurors finally dropped the hammer, handing down a guilty verdict for second-degree murder instead of first-degree. Defense attorneys hammered the state relentlessly over the missing forensic evidence. They aggressively attacked both witnesses, shredding their credibility and reliability. The defense branded the whole trial a massive government overreach built on faded 30-year-old memories. Annette Cahill caught 50 hard years behind bars for second-degree murder in 2019. Critics still tear this conviction apart today. Zero physical forensics, just two ordinary people trying to remember 1992. The Iowa Supreme Court firmly upheld her conviction on appeal in 2022. This sprawling nightmare started with a little girl watching black candles burn and ended with 50 years in prison nearly 30 years later.